Okay, so let's proceed with creating a kind of a common function blueprint um, library, function library. So far, it's only going to have like two functions in it, but I have a feeling it will grow. So in our C++ classes, under ability system, let's go here and create a new C++ class. And I'm about to sneeze. Okay, and go under all classes, and what we want is a blueprint function library. Blueprint function library, not the factory, just the library. And we're going to say next. We're going to leave it right inside of our ability system here in the root. And I'm going to call it HFX blueprint function library. No, HFX, I'm going to call it our ability system library. And we're going to create that. And say no. And I'm going to save all. And I'm going to exit my editor. And I'm going to exit my other one just so I don't have problems. Come back to C++, reload all. Oh, sorry. And here we go. So here's our new class that we just made. And what we want to be able to do is have some blueprint pure functions to be able to return our widget controllers. Now, I'm just realizing that in our HUD class, we actually don't have an ability to do that yet either. So let's go back to our HUD class and see what we need to add now that we've got our main components in our editor. So we had our initialize overlay, which now we actually have an overlay. It doesn't do anything here. But what we want to be able to do on our HUD blueprint is define and set um, the widgets and widget controllers um, of the widgets that the HUD is going to display. Yeah, and we're going to just get started with that. So in a private section on our HUD, we are going to make a T object pointer of type UHFX user widget, and it's going to be an overlay widget. So that's the one that we just made. And it wants a capital O here. And this, it doesn't know what that is yet, so we probably need to forward declare that. So I'm going to say it's our user widget. So it's a class UHFX user widget, right? Because that's what we had. Just want to find it over here. It was somewhere. Oh yeah, it's under UI, HFX user widget, HFX user widget. So that we got our overlay widget. So that's something that we'll be able to assign in our blueprints. It's going to make a U property for that. And we're actually going to set the class of it, I guess is what we're going to do. So here's something that we are going to set in the HUD blueprint. And it's going to be our U property. Wow, my typing's bad today. U property, edit anywhere. And it's going to be a T subclass of our UHFX user widget. And we're going to call it the overlay widget class. So it's the class type that we'll set in our HUD. And then we'll probably create it from here onto that object. So that gives us our widget, and now we want the widget controller that's going to associate with that. So we're going to want a U property of a object pointer, T object pointer. Wow. Okay, object pointer. And it's going to be of type U overlay widget controller. Da, 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 da. And it's going to be our overlay widget controller. I have a feeling I'm missing this. Yes, I'm missing that. We haven't made that yet. So I'm going to blindly use this anyways. We're going to forward declare it here. It's not going to like it. Oh, we're not going to be able to do that. Because I have a widget controller, but I don't have an overlay widget controller, and they're going to be slightly different. Right. So I want to create that. Let's see if we can get through that without too much pain here. I'll just do a compile here. It's the first compile of the day, so I'm going to pause the video. Oh, no, it completed happy. Okay, so let's go back into the editor. Start up my other one as well. And I'm going to go into the content browser under C++ in our UI. And I'm just going to make sure I've got the right spot here. So in our UI, like we've got a widget controller, like it's kind of a basic one, right? But now that we've got this HUD overlay, we want to be able to, and it's going to have some um, specifics to it. So I'm going to create a new C++ class here. I wonder if I can do it this way. So create a C++ class derived from widget controller. I think that's what I want. Yep. And I'm going to put it in a subfolder because there might be many of these of all the same types. And at the high level here, they're kind of like more of the base items. And so I'm going to make a subfolder of just called maybe just WC for widget controllers. I don't want the path name to get too long. And this one's going to be called our overlay widget controller. And it's going to be in my subfolder WC, which is going to be for widget controllers. And I'm going to create that class. I'm going to say no. And that's going to be good for now. So I'm going to save all. And we'll exit out of here. I'll be back here and I can reload all. Okay, now we've got our widget controller, overlay widget controller. And so now let's go back to our HUD, even though we haven't done anything here yet. Let's go back to our HUD. There's gonna be a lot of stuff here for now. And I'm going to uncomment these lines. So we now have a class called overlay widget controller. And that was in our UIWC overlay widget controller. So I can more confidently forward declare it now. It's going to be our U overlay widget controller. Okay. And then we want to do the one that we're going to set in the HUD blueprint is going to be our U property of edit anywhere. So it's going to allow us to set it. And it's going to be a T subclass of type U overlay widget controller. And it's going to be called our overlay widget controller class. Okay. So now we're going to create on our HUD a, well, let's go back to our initialize overlay now, and let's fill in some stuff there. So in our CPP file, this is all we had here, we are going to have some includes here, but we'll let it yell at us when we need them. So first of all, we're going to make sure that we are that we've set these, and we'll crash if we don't. So check if classes for overlay widgets, etc., have been set in Blueprint. So we're going to do a check F. I like this one. I'd like to learn more about it. And we're going to check our overlay widget class. And we're going to respond to the system with a text file that says that the overlay, like if this fails, widget class, uninitialized, please set in in HUD blueprint. Okay, oops, and then we'll do another one similarly for our overlay widget controller class, overlay widget controller class uninitialized set in blueprint. So that's a nice little thing to learn. I don't, again, lots of stuff there for me to learn. Um, so let's in our initialization of our overlay, right? This is in the our kind of our constructor. Let's create the overlay widget. And we'll cast it to our overlay widget. So we have it. So it is, so it's going to be a user widget pointer called widget. And that's going to be our create widget. So it doesn't, it's not giving me what I want to see here. And because we probably need an include. So let's include our user widget, which is in UI slash HFX user widget dot h. So now it recognizes this. And we want to create a widget of type user widget. And that needs a owning object, which would be the world. So we can use get world. And the class type is our overlay widget class. That has been set in the HUD blueprint. And then we can set our overlay widget equal to a cast to our UHFX user widget. And what we'll cast is our widget. So now we've got our widget in memory in C++. We've got the access to it. Now we want to do a similar thing um, with the widget controller. So let's see what that does. So let's create an overlay widget controller. So that's going to be a overlay widget controller pointer, and that'll be our widget controller. We'll set that equal to our get overlay. Well, we need a function here, right? That I don't have yet. So let's see where that has been done. Yeah, so let's go back to our .h file and let's create a function that'll let us get our overlay widget controller. So here, let's do a u overlay widget controller pointer. And we're going to return that when we're going to use get overlay widget controller. And that's going to need and that's going to need, that's going to be one of these things, which we haven't really defined much in yet. But if I just look at our widget controller, our basic one, it needed these parameters set, right? F widget controller params to be able to create a widget controller, right? So this was our base widget controller class, where we're going to be able to set it. But again, it's going to be able to set that, we're going to need to create this parameter set. And so this function is going to need one of those parameter sets ultimately. So let's, and it should be constant. We don't want to be able to change any of it. So F widget controller params reference widget controller params. Now it doesn't know what this is. It's an incomplete type. And so we can forward declare that struct. So we have a struct that we're going to forward declare of F widget controller params. Okay, so now we can define this function, create a definition for it. And here we are. And in here is where we want to create the widget controller based on those parameters that we set. So, and what we want to do is if the okay, let's start this way. So our overlay widget controller is going to equal a new object. And it's going to be a new object of type U overlay widget controller. U overlay widget controller. And to create that object, it needs a it needs to create it in this as its outer object. I'm not sure. And of what class of overlay widget controller class. So the outer object, I guess, is the HUD, and the inner object, or the name of the object type, is going to be this controller class. And don't ask me any questions about that. Okay, so now that would create the new object from the class. And what we want to be able to do, though, whenever we call this, we only want to create it once. So we're going to do an if our overlay widget controller, if it's null pointer, right? If it's a null pointer, then let's create it. And if it's not null, that means we must have gone through that once. And so now we can just return our overlay widget controller. Now, that's we're not quite done yet, because we know that from our base widget controller, we have this function called set the widget controller. So let's do that. So we can call that on our overlay widget controller, and we can go set, and it doesn't know anything about us. So we need to do an include here. So we're going to include, we are going to include our overlay widget controller, which is in UI, WC for widget controllers, and it is our overlay widget controller.h. And that should give us what we're looking for. Set widget controller params, because it's a subclass of the other one, so that's good. And it wants a WC param, so that's what we're passing here. We haven't made it yet, but this is what we're passing. So we can pass in our WC params. And we've got that. And what else do we have on our widget controller? We've got a set, and that's all we've got so far. So we'll continue with that for now. There's going to be something else we want to do here. I'm going to just put a comment here that we need to bind our callbacks to the attributes. So that's a to-do thing there. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to here now in our initialize overlay. And in our initialize overlay, we can now call get overlay widget controller. And it wants, and we need to send it a parameters thing. So let's do that. And so we'll put that together here. So let's create struct for WC params. So a constant WF widget controller params We'll call it widget controller params. And it needs, so it needs these four things. It needs a player controller, a player state, ability system quote, and ability system. Well, at the top of our initialize overlay, that's exactly what we've passed in here. So let's create it with using those. So our PC, our PS, our ASC, and our AS. And that's good. So now we can pass that in here. And so we can pass in our widget controller params. So that's going to get it. So that's going to do this part. It's going to jump down here. It's going to create a new object for that. And after we've then created that controller, we want to assign controller to the widget. So we can do our overlay widget. And do we have set widget controller? Set widget controller. And it wants a widget controller. Well, we got one. It's called widget controller. I always laugh at the way that variable names get used, and it's so straightforward and obvious to use them because it makes everything fall together. But coming from the 80s where I'd make up variable names that are ridiculous to this is funny. Anyways, and then we don't know how to do this yet, but we're going to then want to broadcast initial values, because this is a setup initialization. So we're going to want to broadcast initial values once controller is set, right? And then once that is done, we're going to add widget to viewport. So we're going to say overlay widget, and we're going to add to viewport. Okay, so let's look at what are some of the things that we need to do. We need to do this broadcasting of initial values, but that's probably going to need this callback to the attributes for it to be able to actually broadcast them. So let's see what we need to do for that. Um, so on our, let me just see. So on our basic widget controller class, we had two base functions, broadcast initial values and bind callbacks. And what I can do, because even though it hasn't been overridden yet, in our HUD, if I return to the HUD, and when I say bind callbacks to attributes, we can actually do our overlay widget controller. We can call bind callbacks to dependencies. It doesn't do anything yet, but at least it's there because it's in our base class of our widget controller. It doesn't do anything, but it's going to be overridden And that's where we need to override that in our overlay widget controller subclass of that. So let's see where that and how that happens. Okay, so I'm going to go into our overlay widget controller .h, and inside of our class, I'm going to do a public section. I'll do my protected section. I'll do a private section, and I'm going to do a public section again for getters and setters. So inside our public section here, I'm going to do a virtual void, and we're going to do both of the base ones from our widget controller parent class. So broadcast initial values, and so this is going to be an override. And then we can do a virtual void bind callbacks to dependencies override. And if I spelled virtual properly, it would probably virtual. Would probably get rid of those ugly red lines. Okay, and if I look, so if I create a definition for the broadcast of initial values, I'm going to just put a comment here that no call to super as base is empty. Just as a reminder, if anything ever changes, to come and have to do that. Probably a better way to do that. I'm not sure why or how. To be able to get our initial values, we need to get our attribute set. So let's create a UHFX attribute set pointer. Of course, it doesn't like that at all. So we need to include. So let's include our ability system, and it's called inside our ability system is our HFX attribute set. HFX attribute set.h. So this attribute set, we'll do a cast checked because it should work. And it's going to be a UHFX attribute set. And we're going to pass it our attribute set, which begs me to think that I should have defined what attribute set was. So our attribute set is from our widget controller, probably from our base. There it is. So here's our attribute set from our base widget controller class. So that's why it shows up. We don't need to define it here because it already exists. So that's there. And why doesn't it like this one? Because I got a few too many H's in here. There we go. So that gives us that. Now I think I gotta do a semicolon there. Um, so now we need to create some delegate functions. So in um, our .h file here for our overlay widget controller, we want to, in our public section here, we're going to, these are going to be blueprint assignable. Delegate functions. Why? I'm not entirely sure, but we'll learn about that as we go. So we're going to make a U property, and it's blueprint assignable. And we're going to put in the category of the game playability system, gas. I'm going to do a pipe, and these will be attributes. Interesting. And what we need to do is we need to declare or define some delicate definitions. So up above here, um, up above here, I want to declare dynamic multicast one param MBF on float attribute changed signature. It wants a float and a new value. Wowzer. Okay, so I just reminding myself now, or because I went back and revisited this declaring delegates and stuff, because it's a concept that I understand, but I'm not good at the implementation of it. So this statement to declare a dynamic multicast delegate with one parameter is because we want to be able to broadcast one parameter. So that's the easy part. The dynamic means we want to be able to set it, I think. It means that we want to be able to set it in blueprints so that it can be dynamically assigned. And multicast because we want its ability for multiple things to maybe bind to it. So we are declaring a delegate that can be connected to in blueprints and to multiple locations and with one parameter. This is the basically the delegate name. So we can call this anything we want, but as I understand it, it has to start with the letter F, capital F. So we are going to say our delegate signature. So we're going to put the word signature at the end just to identify that this is a delegate um, definition, delegate name. We are going to basically, and we're calling it on float attribute changed. So in other words, when a float value of an attribute changed. So that's how that name came to be. So down here in the public section, we are going to then create the 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 function, the callback function, I think is what's here. So it's a U property. We want it to be blueprint assignable, right? Because that's why the dynamic. And here is our name, and we're going to set it to be on health changed. And then in our CPP file, now I've gone ahead and done a few things here while I was working it out. Um, so we had our attribute set here. And so now here, let me just delete this and I'll do it over again. So our variable or our delegate on health changed, we can then broadcast, and the value that we want to broadcast needs to be a float parameter because of how we defined our delegate definition there. And the value that we want to broadcast in the initial values is we want to for the health changed, for the health attribute, we want to get our HFX attribute set, and we want to get our health value. And then we're done for that one. Do that. And in the binding the callback dependencies for that same item, what we end up doing is, again, we get the attribute set because the binding of the callbacks, the ability system component is the thing that's going to be watching all of this stuff. So, and it has a function. Well, let me just go through it again. I'll just comment it out so we don't lose it, but we'll watch it. The ability system component, and we want to get the gameplay attribute value change delegate. So this is where we register our we're going to register our callback to this attribute's value when it changes with this function. And so it wants which attribute. So for this case, we are going to use our HFX attribute set, and I'm going to use get the health attribute. So that's the one that we're going to use, right? And then we want to be able to bind it to a function, and we're going to use this add lambda, and it adds a delegate. Technically, it says that this works for any functor types, but lambdas are the primary use case. So I, I think it's more or less like we're defining the function um, in line. So we don't need to actually just say add a U object and then create the function and then call the function. We're going to do it all in one line here. And so the format for that is it needs square brackets and then it needs round brackets and then it needs the so inside the and then it's going to need and then you define the function. So that's inside the curly brackets. So inside the curly brackets is where our on health changed um, delegate is going to be called. And that's what we want to do. We want to broadcast. Oh, I can't spell. And so it doesn't show up. Notice it doesn't show up when we did the dot thing. And that's because inside this little square brackety thing is where we need to kind of what are we including? So we want to include this because this object, the widget controller, is where on health changed is defined. And so now if I do dot, I'll have the broadcast, right? And broadcast wants to broadcast a value. And the value that we want to broadcast in this case is a little different because if we look at this get gameplay attribute value changed, it returns an f on gameplay attribute value change. And so if we peek at that, we see that here's that value change. And if I peek at that, we see that it wants the a value. So it's a parameter value, but it's going to use this f on attribute change data. That's what it's going to return. So let me do that again. So it's going to return a reference to an object of this type here, which is contains the data in a constant f on attribute change data. So the so this function then is going to need a that value passed into it, and it was a const f on attribute change data reference, and we'll call it data. So this function is going to return or is going to fill this value of data. And then this value of data is going to be used in our broadcast because this value of data is going to hold the value of in the format for the attribute of the attribute. Because if I peek into this, we can see what it looks like. So it says right here, it's a temporary parameter struct used when an attribute is changed. So it's going to have a new value, an old value, and whatever this gameplay effect mod callback data value. And so what we're obviously going to be interested in the new value after it has changed. So to get there, that's going to be in that data value, and we're going to take the new value. And I think that's it for that. So that's the end of that line within the function definition. And then we need to, I think, close off. Oh no, I had that down here. It was here. I'm going to just bring that up to one line up, and then we'll end that line here. And that's how that was built. And so that's the definition of that. Okay, so this red squiggly ultimately goes away after a while. It seems to really take a long time for IntelliSense to find that definition worked out. So this is kind of generic, which is great, right? Because we could have defined this as on changed, on health change signature, on mana change signature, blah, 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 onward and offward. Um, but we can write it this way, and then that way, as far as our overlay widget controller is concerned, we want to define um, so on our health changes, that's our red bar. And we want to, I'm going to copy this and twice. And I'm going to define on stamina changed. And I'm going to define on mana changed. Okay. And so now with that done there, we can broadcast those values. So on the broadcast initial values, in the same way, we can do on stamina changed dot broadcast, and we can get our HFX attribute set, and we can get stamina. And then we can do on mana changed broadcast, HFX attribute set, get mana. Okay, so that's those initial values would be set and or be broadcast, right? And then similarly in the binding of it so that we can track it whenever the value changes, we would do a similar thing as to our other binding here. So I'm going to copy it because and I'm going to twice. So here we want to get the stamina attribute, and this is all fine. Here we want the on stamina changed, and then this part is fine. In this one, we want to get the mana attribute, and we're going to do the on mana changed broadcast. Okay, so that's that's those, and I'm going to just do I gotta close this off. I'm going to save this and we'll build to make sure we don't have any errors, and we're good. And in the next video, we will look at getting that maybe to work and have it update our little data bars there, and go from there. So thanks a lot, and uh, I'm happy that I kind of figured this part out for once and for all in my life, hopefully, or in my mind, of being able to create our own um, delegates or callback and callbacks. I'll get those two words. I know they mean different things, but I'm using them interchangeably right now. Um, and yeah, so we'll do that. I did add another include up here, which I don't need right yet. If I take that out, everything works, but we are going to be using that um, maybe later, or maybe I'm just going to remove it. Um, Let's just try it again. Let's try to build this again. I don't think I need that there. Yeah, it's fine. I think it's just it just gets upset by trying to find things. It's kind of funny. All right. So in the next video, we will. I would really like to maybe get some positive feedback on the HUD side. Okay. Have a good one. Bye.